right? So here we have Kate Middleton, and you're probably aware that she recently was diagnosed with cancer. We don't know, based on the news, what kind of cancer she has, I think. At least I haven't found that yet. But there was speculation running in the background because you know how these things are. They tend to get out, especially when it comes to famous people. But in any case, this has been something that through rumor has been in place since the beginning of the year. And then now, more recently, it was brought forward. And what you see immediately when you look at her chart at birth is that she's born on a full moon. Speaking of full moons, that we're in now, she herself was born on the full moon, and it cuts across 612. I'm sure you remember from previous classes that axis is the health axis, right? In any chart, which in her case is occupied by Cancer in Capricorn. But if you were looking at a natural zodiac, it's Virgo Pisces. Health and more health. The way I've explained it frequently is health. You look at the 6th and you're going to the doctor, you're getting repairs done. Not that this is an exact thing, but you would say a regular doctor visit is the 6th, but the 12th can also be a doctor visit, but it can also be a hospital situation. The 12th is the place of hospitals. So this axis is health related. And then we also see here that the 8th is related to death. This is why separately, if you're looking at quincunxes, 150s, it's the connection of 1 to Scorpio, which is 150 degrees, from Aries, and to Virgo, which is another 150 degrees, hence this type of arrangement. And so we go here, we see that, if we go here, we see that she's born with the sun and moon in this type of alignment. The fact that the lunar nodes are there intensifies it. I would have to say that's not the greatest situation to have the nodes right next to the lights like that. It emphasizes the theme a little too much for my liking. And so we then see next is that's where the sun and moon are, but then that's the 180, opposition. Then you see that Mars, Saturn, Pluto. Now, the sun and moon are at 18 and 19. Saturn is the closest to squaring the sun and moon, which isn't exactly, an endorsement of ease. It transmits challenge for sure. But I always do this when I see a cluster of planets somewhere. I look at the main planet, in this case that's closest to Saturn, but if you take the 3 of them together, Mars, Saturn, and Pluto, and you average the degrees, it's where the cluster of this energy coalesces at 19, almost 20 degrees. So you can say the Libra cluster, Libra stellium, is definitely part of the square. In fact, it's directly square, the sun and moon. And then on the other side, Eris at 14, it's only a few degrees away, so you have to count it as well. So you've got a grand cross situation here. Planets in cardinal points opposing and squaring each other. So this is to say that a person like this is most likely to encounter health situations in their life. And you could have said at her birth, this is something you'll probably be grappling with. And indeed, based on the timing, you will see, as we talking about the timing, right around now is one of those doorways for sure as well, because of where the planets are. So there, you then begin to wonder, well, why did she get this diagnosis now in her life, and where might it be going as we go into future months, future weeks, months, years? And you see that the Saturn is currently in Pisces. This is something we've learned about since Saturn entered Pisces. Saturn entered Pisces last March of 23, but to be fair, we didn't hear anything. Maybe something was going on, but nothing was really in the news until 2024. 2024, Saturn is pretty early in Pisces because it had gone to 7 degrees, but then it backtracked into the very early part of Pisces at the end of 23, and then it came back in. Right now, as we speak, Saturn is around 12 plus degrees. And so how do you link this? Well, you link it because, first of all, the 8th, even though strictly speaking, you don't say, well, that's a health house, but it's the death house. So it's like when health becomes so totally complicated that you could die, for example. Or you notice a lot about the 8th is surgical interventions, major repairs. So if you're getting a standard repair here, you're getting a major repair in the 8th. And that's in fact what happened here. She was at the doctor's for some kind of abdominal surgery, and they discovered that there was cancer involved. By the way, when you're talking stomach, abdominal, you do go to the moon for that as a pretty direct body correlation. But the link in the transits would be to realize that, if I can get Where is it? One of these. So let's go back here. From Pisces, Saturn is 150 to Mars in her chart. And this is approximately when the diagnosis was made public and so forth. So you have the Saturn in the 8th doing a 150 to the first planet, but of course Saturn will keep moving. And you see here that if I point to March, the month we're in when this all becomes public and so forth, as the 150 to Mars, then you also know that Saturn moves forward so that by the summer you see it there stationing at 19.5 degrees, and that'll be you shift this line so that now it'll be 150 contacting the cluster degrees, the 19-20 degrees, where all these planets coalesce. So effectively, you would say it's doing 150 to all the planets in Libra. And one interpretation to that is that it's just not going to feel good. That's health as a major, major topic, which makes a lot of sense in that she's now getting chemotherapy. The idea that you're not going to feel great when Saturn is in those degrees, it's a standard correlation, and that's what gets anticipated. And then you also can see, though, that yes, there it's really intense because it's a station to those degrees. But then in 2025, it returns over those degrees one more time in February. And if you keep dragging this line, you see that you go all the way into 26, because after it finishes with the 20-degree range, immediately it finds the Saturn. In fact, even in the summer at 19.5, it's not that far away from Saturn in a 150. So, 2024 is difficult in that sense, but finds the Saturn again in 25, and then it moves forward into Saturn does into Aries, gets beyond those degrees, but comes back in 26 to make the 150 to Pluto from Pisces. The point being, there's a lot of activity from Pisces happening the whole time. Saturn is in Pisces, which means March of 23, but especially early 24, because that's when Saturn locks into the first planet in Libra, and then all the way pretty much to the end of the sign until it enters Aries. But then, of course, when you see that when it enters Aries, this means that not right away again, but not too long after that, by the spring of 26, Saturn reaches degrees in Aries where it'll oppose Mars. And in the context of a health diagnosis, and keep in mind, I haven't said yet, the Saturn at birth, aside from being a very challenging planet to her health because it directly squares her sun and her moon and is part of this cluster, etc., etc., it is the Lord of the 6th over here. So a planet like this, when it's circulating, goes anywhere, planets take the energy they have at birth. They move that energy around. So the Lord of the 6th brings about 6th house patterns. And so up here in Aries, it opposes Mars. There's also, even prior to that, broadly speaking, you say Saturn is entering Aries, Saturn is entering the sign that squares her sun and moon. And so that already is a troublesome signal. And this gets displayed pretty quickly, because if in 26 it only finds the Mars by the spring, and then it repeats, and into early 27, then in 27 itself, it'll find the sun and moon, and it'll go into 28. So in other words, Saturn entering Aries is something that if she doesn't find the healing during the year she's in, this could take the problem into a deeper level. Or there could be, for example, some kind of healing in 24, maybe even in 25, but then in 26 it could return, if not in 26 and 27. In other words, you're in a period that is quite threatening. There's no question. So that's from the perspective of Saturn currently we having in Pisces. Now going back to where planets that are there now, also signaling that something is happening on the health level. If you say the Saturn is the 150, because it is 150 to Libra over here, meaning most directly to Mars for now, but not too long from now to all of them, because it'll be in the 19th degree. Then the other planet that is signaling 150s is Uranus, because Uranus, if you look at the degrees it's in, 19 Taurus covers there, this whole swath in Taurus covers from 19 to the end, but really you got to go all the way there like that before it gets out of Taurus, all the way to 26. Well, from there, what it's doing is 19 is the cluster, so it's 150 to that, and then when it goes further, it'll catch the Saturn, it'll catch the Pluto, it'll come back, and so forth. It's in this range, doing 150 for an extended period of time, and if you go in the other direction, it's doing it to Neptune at the 25th degree, which you can see is going to be there in the middle of the year, comes back and goes over it again in 2025. Perhaps in here, a little less so, but there's a standard rule with transits that, particularly big transits like this, big planets, slow planets to slow planets, even in here in 2026, at 27, close to 28, it's not safe for this Neptune. So this Uranus is definitely in play around the connections it's making that link it to health, for sure. There's no question. The other thing is that something happening in her chart that further reveals the health pattern is the progressed moon. Now, for those of you that don't know, and probably most of you do, but progressions are the movements in the days after birth. And what you're doing is you're equating a day to a year. And although that to some may seem illogical, made up, it's actually, in my mind, one of the best methods in astrology because it's geometric. You're taking the circle of a day, the pattern of a full turn, and you're projecting it into a year. And so anything geometric is what I most appreciate about astrology. In fact, it's why I so much prefer Western astrology to Vedic, because Western astrology thrives on the geometry, the aspects, the precision of the numbers, etc. Where in Vedic, they don't get into that as much. They have all these different periods that they work with and so forth. In Western astrology, the geometry is what is most compelling. And so progressions are extremely meaningful. And I can tell you for a fact, from having followed them for decades, it's remarkable how, for example, when you think of progression and you say, well, a day after my birth, the moon is in a certain place, 10 days, 12 days, that seems in your mind maybe more believable than if someone says to you, well, what if it's when you're much older? By then the moon has been spinning around and around. Can that pattern hold? 100%. I recently experienced a progressed moon square in my chart in the early months of this year, and it was so clear that this was happening, both from the feeling that I was experiencing, the psychology of it, as well as the events. So you can see that in her chart, the progressed moon is currently in late Capricorn, which means that she is in years. Here's what you have to realize: progressed moon, since the moon in transit day to day moves through a sign in about 2.5 days, this is going to translate to 2.5 years in the progression. But currently, it's late in the sign. And now this is where, if you check the progressions, the actual degrees, go here to this. This is her progressed chart, meaning the inside is her natal chart, the one you were just looking at. It's exactly the same as this, drawn in black and white. But on the outside is where the progressed planets are. And you can see the progressed moon. This is drawn a little bit skewed. It puts it in Aquarius, but at 2832 pertains to Capricorn over here. And you can see that from September of 2023 all the way to 24, what's happening is the progressed moon in relatively late Capricorn at 21 squares the Saturn, and then later in January squares Pluto. So if we look back here, it's in these degrees here. So it's squaring Saturn and squaring Pluto. Again, I can tell you for a fact, neither of those is an easy progression. Progressed moon square Pluto can literally be a terror situation where it's really scary. Pluto is the lord of the underworld. Pluto, this is where I disagree with people who don't associate Pluto to Scorpio. Even though I think Mars is the first lord of Scorpio, Pluto definitely associates to Scorpio. Well, being the lord of the underworld should be enough, but for sure it connects to that house. So it's a very scary situation to have it there. And first of all, it reflects the event really, really well. But then the other thing is that this pattern here that I've drawn from September to March of 27, this is the progressed moon. What it's doing is, right now it's in Capricorn, but next, it's going to progress into Aquarius, which you can see here would be in May of 24. So right now, all the way into May is still in Capricorn. Then it goes into Aquarius. Then it's in Aquarius for quite a while, a couple of years, 2.5 years. But then in September of 26, it'll enter Pisces, by which point this sun will have progressed a little forward. But then in February, I believe, of 27 is when the progressed moon and the progressed sun come together. This is a lunation, a new moon. Happens every 30 years. Kate had her new moon when she was 15 years old. Her last new moon, it was in Aquarius. She now will have her next one in February of 27, but the moon enters Pisces in September 26. And I've noticed that when the moon enters the sign where it's going to go new, you start to notice that something important is happening. But, I got to say, I would not... It wouldn't be the first pattern that I think, oh, well, this is going to help her necessarily. It might. If she can get to that point and survive the trauma, then it's a new moon, it's a new start, new direction, etc. But the fact that you see it in the 8th does not really inspire a ton of confidence, because it's a dangerous place. The 8th is house of death, and so when you coalesce what is happening here with the new moon, it's not a great thing. The other thing, by the way, that you see in the progressions, and this is that the Mars, progress Mars, what it's doing is when you see her progress chart, you see it here. First of all, you see it at 19, and it's got an S. This Mars in progression over the first 42 years of her life has progressed day by day, 10, 11, 12, 13, till it reaches 19, and then it's going to go backward. But when a planet is in its station, be it in transit or in progressions, it radiates a lot more energy. It's more powerful. It's more intense. It can be helpful, but it can be also be a moment of crisis around that. And so you see it here in the progression of 19 Libra. And of course, notice that what is 19 Libra? It's that cluster again, those degrees that are where all the planets in Libra coalesce. So you put the progressed Mars right there. What does that do? It's from those coalescing degrees, squaring the moon and squaring the sun. So this Mars is a major, major planet in describing what is going on in our life right now. The other thing is that in derivative houses, something that I've related to for years and years is that the death house is the eighth. The eighth from the eighth is the third. The third is definitely a complicated house. In the Vedic system, they assign it primarily negative meanings. I can see why. This house is generally, I would see it as complicated and adding to the problem rather than subtracting. So given that the Mars is there at birth, that the progressed Mars is there, that the cluster of planets is also there, you just start to see way, way too many things ganging up to correlate with something potentially very serious. And to be fair, you have to say Saturn at 19, 150 to all of this, but it does sextile the sun and trine the moon. So on that basis, you would say potential for healing is there as well. So it's not all catastrophic in that way. Now, the other thing is I've put Pluto in here and Neptune as well. They're not doing a ton right now in transit in this chart, but you can see that Pluto in future years will enter Aquarius, but fully enter Aquarius next year. It's mostly in Aquarius this year too. Right now, it's in early Aquarius, but the point being that by the time it gets to that range there, it's going to connect with Mercury and then Venus. So it adds to this new moon situation, but the fact that Saturn extends forward through there, not particularly great to have this be the case in here in terms of finding your way out of this crisis. The other thing too is that even though I don't, as I've said in prior classes, I am distrustful of the nodal transits because sometimes they are so graphically accurate, but other times they seem to be doing absolutely nothing. But this would be a case where it's another thing that is part of the pattern because you see it in Aries from late 23 and into 25. Before it switches to Pisces. And matter of fact, right now, as this thing came to light, it's in the very same degrees of Aries, 19 degrees Aries, triggering this cluster energy. And of course, if you say planets circulate their energy, well, then so do the nodes, and the nodes are in the health area. And right now, they are part of the cluster and including squaring themselves. That definitely counts, though, if you're looking at the nodal axis being in the same place it was at birth or opposite or square, certainly gets added to it. And notice that Chiron, which again is not a planet I always use just because I limit the number of points or to avoid headaches and sometimes discourage people from going on tangents because they'll be assigning, in my opinion, too much importance to Chiron. But Chiron is a health, the wounded healer, health type of planet. And in one sense, perhaps, this would be a thing to say if you were projecting into it and being really, really optimistic, you'd say, well, maybe she gets through this and she becomes a public symbol of someone who overcomes a serious health problem, since Chiron is in the 10th place of notoriety where you're known out in the world, all of that. Sextile the moon, trine the sun, true, but it also does a 150 to Saturn, so that's not as good. And it's certainly part of the situation right now because Chiron isn't amazing. It's in the same degrees as well. I'm not showing the ephemeris here, but during 2024, Chiron is roaming around this cluster of degrees as well. So it's part of the pattern as well.